Hi, I'm Alex Sheive. I'd like to talk to you about enthusiasm versus readiness and a sustainable pace for organizational change. This is a story about a financial services company with 24% annual revenue growth year over year, placing them consistently in the top 5,000 fastest growing companies in America. The president and founder read the Scrum book and found that there was a lot of things they could be doing better. But the point is, this is not a rescue. This is a proactive transformation with buy-in from the very top, from the very start. So the first thing we did was go to Tennessee and talk to the customer-facing teams and leadership. We then went to Florida to talk to the software teams. The founder told us that when he read the Scrum book, it felt like we had a fly on the wall of their offices. Everything we mentioned was something they faced, and he wasn't wrong. When we interviewed people in the different offices, we found an organization that wasn't just waterfall, they were almost anti-agile. Right down to the fact that the business analysts were forbidden from talking to the software developers to make sure everything was in a spec. So, what did we do? Well, we decided to focus on our reference model of the Florida software teams. That was the bottleneck. And we got them scrumming in 6 cross-functional teams doing 1-week sprints. We set up an EMS, the business analysts became scrum masters, and the old product team became the product owners. But as soon as we started sprinting, we figured out there was a piece of the puzzle that we were missing. The first signal came when the newly minted chief product owner called up the president late at night in a panic. "Where's my empire? I don't report, no one reports to me anymore. Do I even matter?" he said. The president, who really got Scrum, talked him off the ledge and reminded him that the chief product owner is a very important role. And we didn't really think much of it. Then at the end of sprint 1, we had team members asking, "Hey, who do we ask for vacation time under Scrum? How does that work?" And when we had originally asked about the org structure, they left something out. They left out that there were department heads under the CIO that controlled things like budget and hiring and vacation time. And the reason they left that out is because it was something they weren't ready to change. So we kept that static, but it actually was a deep cultural thing, building your empire and this reporting structure. And it reared its head again when the QA lead decided to leave the company. She said she had built that team herself, hired all those team members, and now she felt like just another tester on her cross-functional team. To try and keep her, we set up the QA quality circle and had her lead it that day, and we saw that they had this great camaraderie. They used to do monthly lunches. It was something good that they hadn't mentioned because they had been so focused on what they'd read in the book. Everyone in the company had read the book and they said, "Oh, this is what's different from us in that," and they didn't bring up the good things that they wanted to keep. It was too little too late. She ended up leaving the company. It wasn't that bad though, and things were going smoothly for a few sprints until the founder flew in from Tennessee because he was worried about losing the CIO. The CIO had stepped back from his old hands-on management style of the Florida office in keeping with Scrum to give the teams more autonomy. But that was such a departure from the way he had operated before that the teams kept coming up and going, "Hey, are you getting pushed out by Scrum?" And so many people asked that he started to worry himself. And the founder, to assuage him, basically drew a diagram like this and said, "Look, the same structure's there, we just kind of drew these horizontal boxes of the cross-functional teams. I need you being not an office manager, but my CIO, you're more important than ever. I need you to stick around." So what did we learn from these bumps in the road and what could we do better next time with that? First of all, enthusiasm isn't readiness. In fact, when you're looking ahead to big change, that can sometimes make you forget where you are and what the next step is. Example of this, a bunch of people went to the gym with the eye of the tiger on January 2nd and went so hard they couldn't go back for a week because they were too sore. So how do we make sure we don't go from eye of the tiger to tiger balm? We need to clarify and maintain a sustainable pace. What's that involve? Well, as we saw, first of all, you have to make sure you're fully aware of where you're starting, right? When we asked about their org structure, they glossed over part of it. We pressed them a couple times and they were like, "Oh, you will do what Scrum says." And that was because they had something they weren't ready to change, and that's the last thing you want to think about when you're focused on the future and this glorious new way that you're going to work. We should have pressed harder. You have to dig deep on that and press on that. Secondly, because everyone was just complaining about the way things were and they had so many problems, they left out things like the QA culture that we had. We should have set up the QA quality circle from the start. So make sure you know everything that's in the starting state. Secondly, make sure everyone is clear on what will and won't change, especially for managers. We say managers become leadership, but what is that actual mapping in terms of their role? And for everyone, they need a mapping between that starting state and the next step. Any gaps you leave will create friction, angst, uncertainty, and a vacuum that they'll fill with speculation. And that's always going to slow you down. Once you've got that, look for signals of friction that come up. We should have dug deeper and saw who else might be worried about their empire as soon as the chief product owner brought that up. We should have realized that was probably a cultural thing. But even with those bumps in the road and the fact that we had to kind of deal with them in real time, we had some good results. We did a survey, 1 to 5, self-evaluation on their biggest issues, and we saw dramatic changes across the board, 8 sprints in. Their team velocities, we had a 4x increase for the 2 teams working on the new code base to get rid of their old tech debt code, and the legacy teams were about a 2x increase. And probably most dramatically, higher quality. Prior to Scrum, they had a backlog of 100 open bugs and growing. 8 sprints in, we got that down to 17 and shrinking. Any questions? Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that first of all, that was great. Thank you very much for that. My question is, the CPO and the POs were all in Tennessee and all the rest of the team was in Florida, so they didn't have FaceTime in the ceremonies and the other stuff. So can you speak to some of that sort of authority divide and face-to-face divide and the challenges and opportunities there?
Yeah, that's actually a little bit part of the backstory of this too, or more color to the story. The CIO is definitely part of leadership. He's in the C-suite. But when you say leadership, everyone thought that's over in Tennessee. And I think that was part of it. He was a bit more of an office manager, and when we drew charts, he was like, where am I? I see leadership, but am I that? Right? And that was part of his sort of psychological thing. But they had always had this product team that they were acting a little bit like product owners, but just in this waterfall process before. And they wanted to stay in Tennessee. We basically got them up with Zoom. They had, as a video conferencing tool. They were using GoToMeeting, and no one knew how to work it except for a couple people in Florida. And even with Zoom, it was very rough. But we encouraged them to just always be using video conferencing to make sure they got as much FaceTime as possible. We started instituting, trying to have one of the product owners at least kind of rotating through and being in Florida. I don't know how that's panned out since, but they were experimenting with that as well. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge, especially for the product owners to be available enough to the teams with a slight time difference and that distance. Yes?
There was one thing which was, I was like, what? And that's going from business analysts to Scrum Masters.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Right. Well, as we know, I mean, this is a challenge sometimes, right? We say, well, what's your role as a business analyst? We say in Scrum, you've got job security, but maybe not role security, right? And so what we held was actually a Scrum Master election. We said, out of everyone, who wants to be a Scrum Master? And the business analysts knew that that was probably not, I mean, they could be on a team, but a lot of them would probably have to transition to Scrum Master. And so we actually had everyone go around to the tables of the teams, pitch why they want to be a Scrum Master, and we had them kind of match up. Oh, I'd like to be with this team, and which teams would want which person as Scrum Master, and that's how we transitioned to that. But yes, it's a big role change, obviously, right? That's not exactly, and we did have we had one Scrum Master come from QA and one from development, I believe.
Interesting.
Just a follow-up question.
Yeah.
It was a great, maybe not so great for the person, where the person classically goes, I feel I'm not useful anymore, etc. You kind of know that movie is going to happen sometimes in this change.
Sometimes.
So what are the learnings or advice you have where you know this is going to happen to avoid those? Do you want to avoid it, and what could be done differently, and what can you share with us?
In retrospect, it seemed very unfortunate at the time. I'll say though that she was also a bit known for micromanaging, and maybe she just wasn't a fit for this way of working either. Because I would have thought, like saying at that QA quality circle and saying, no, look, you're still able to be the product owner of this and have this, this position where you're able to drive what the team is doing in this functional role, what this functional level is doing in the quality circle, and it really didn't register. And I think she actually, from what I heard, she went into an entirely different industry. So maybe she just wasn't much of a fit, and sometimes that has to happen. Sometimes that's, like we said, we don't want to push anyone out. But if Scrum's not the way you wanted to work, and you only liked it the way before, where it was you micromanaging everyone, then you might counsel yourself out in that way. But yeah, I think you need to watch for, the happiness metric didn't really lead us to it or anything like that. I think you need to have your ear to the ground. Thank you.